guys, it's Insane Developer here. Welcome back to my channel. In the past episode, we have seen how to set up the prerequisites for our expense tracker application. So in this tutorial, we are going to see how to set up the model class, database, Datastore, and ViewModels for our expense tracker application. So without wasting that much time, let's get into the topic. We need to create a new package and select this package, and I'm going to name my package called model. Inside of this model, we need to create a new class called transaction. So this is a database schema. So these are all the values which we are going to collect for each transaction. We are having the ID which acts as a primary key, and we are also having the title, amount, and transaction type, whether an income or expense, and we are also having the tag. It basically denotes the category, and having the when we are having, which is basically a date and time, and also having the created at, which is basically a timestamp of when each transaction has been created. So now let's switch back to design. Here you will be able to see this is a transaction detail screen. When you click on this, you will be navigated to this screen. Here we are showing the transaction in details. So here you can able to see title, amount, transaction type, tag, when, and a note, and created at. So these are all the details which you are collecting for each transaction. Now let's switch back to coding. I'm going to delete this and type data. So inside of this, just type ID, which is int. The default value will be 0, and where title, which is going to be string, it's going to be double, where note, we are also collecting the note, where created at, this is a timestamp, so it's going to be long, and the default value will be system.time in millis. We need to open parentheses here. Inside of that, now we need to convert this timestamp into a formatted date. For that, we need to type created at date format, which returns a string, and get inside of this date format dot get date and time instance in dot format. Inside of this, we need to pass this parameter created at. So now it will return the formatted date, which is something like this. You can able to see this is a formatted date which you are going to get. I'm just going to copy this and switch back to Android Studio. So now we need to mark this class as an entity. So what is entity? So entity basically denotes the table in SQLite. So we need to mark this as an entity, and inside of this entity constructor, we need to type table name. Just I'm going to name this as all transactions. And now each entity must have a primary key. So let's take an example. Imagine we are in college and each student will have an own unique ID as a roll number or registration number. So it is easy to find that particular person or particular student, and we can perform some queries and we can easily find that student by ID. So that's the main reason why we are having the registration ID or roll number. So the exact same principle applies in DB. So for that, we need to annotate this ID as in primary key. Here ID is in primary key. Instead of this, I'm going to auto-generate the ID. Instead of manually generating, I'm going to auto-generate this ID. So I'm going to give auto-generate is equal to true. When you enter the second transaction, it will automatically increment and the ID will be 1 for second transaction. And now we also need to annotate this info with a column. So we need to give a column info. The name will be ID, and I'm going to copy this and paste it here and just change it to title. Here this is amount. You can give any name for your column info. So I'm giving the same exact name for all the tabs. And we need to do another thing. So here we need to add serializable, which is very useful to pass the data between multiple activities and fragments. You need to create a new DAO class. For that, I'm going to create a new package called DB. Instead of this DB, we are going to create a new interface called transaction DAO. And we need to annotate this interface with DAO annotation. So what is DAO? DAO is a data access object which is really helpful to access your application persistent data. So in our case, our first function is going to be insert. So suspend function, insert transaction, and I'm going to pass transaction model, and we need to annotate this with insert. Since we are doing insert, we need to annotate with insert transaction. On conflict, if you found any conflict, on conflict strategy dot replace. So what this function does, so whenever you found a new existing values, any conflict, we will replace with the new value. So this is what this on conflict strategy dot replace is mentioning here. And here we are also having other options called abort, ignore, and replace. So we don't want to ignore, so it's better to replace it here. So whenever you found any duplicate values, it will automatically replace. And what does this insert annotation means? So insert annotation is a special DAO access. So what does this insert annotation means? So insert annotation is a special DAO method which is used to perform insert operation in SQLite. So I'm going to copy this. Okay. I'm going to write the case here. Used to get, used to insert new section. I'm going to copy this. Below that, just change it to update, and here update transaction, update existing. So it is exactly same as previous function. So it is used to update the transaction. In case if you found any duplicate values or existing values, just replace it with the new value. And I'm going to paste it again. And this function is going to be delete. We don't need anything here inside of this constructor. And just change it to delete transaction. And now we need to get all the saved transaction. So for that, it's going to be function get. Now we need to get all saved transaction. For that, we need to function get all transactions, and which is like row instead of the list, instead of this transaction model. I think we have imported a wrong one. Import. Yes. Now we need to write a query. This time we have to annotate this with query, and inside of this query constructor we need to write the SQLite function. Inside of this query annotation we need to write SQLite queries. So for that I'm going to write select star from all transactions. So now it will select all the transaction from the table, which we are going to return a list. All saved. Okay. And also we need to get a single transaction type. So now it will get all the transaction of type, whether it can be income or expense or both. So now we need to get a transaction which is a type of income or expense. So for that I'm going to paste it the same. Oops. Just copy this and just paste the same, and just change it to get transaction, and inside of this we need to change where transaction type, which is a column name, is equal to transaction type. And I'm going to copy this, and we need to pass the parameter here and here. So now it is very useful to get a single type of transaction, whether it can be an income or expense. So for example, in this instead here, get now we have done with all the DAO classes. Now we have successfully finished the DAO. I'm going to close this. So we need to create a database class for our RoomDB. For that, we need to create a new class called After Database. And I'm going to change this to abstract type. And this has to be extend room database. And also we need to annotate this room database class with an database annotation, so that room will easily identify the entities and all the association with the DAO class. So just instead of this entities, it's going to be transaction model class, comma, and version, which is going to be 1, which is in database version, and export schema is going to be false. And last star. Okay. So now inside of this, again type abstract function get transaction DAO. So now you need to create a singleton here. So that's company and object. Private var instance application database with volatile. And any. So now we need to check whether the DB instance is already created. Otherwise, we need to create a one. Or else we need to create a new instance. So for this, we need to create database function, private function, create our database, and we have to pass the context, and it's going to be room dot database builder. Inside of this, context dot application context, and app database class.java, and our database name will be transaction.db, and we are going to build this build, and in the top we need to come, and here we need to invoke this operator function invoke, and inside of this, let's pass the context, and we are getting the instance. So synchronized lock, and inside of this we are getting the instance. If not null, we are getting the instance. Otherwise, we are creating the database, pass the context, but also getting the instance. So now we have successfully set up the database for application, and now we need to create a new repository. So now we need to create a new class called repository, so that I'm going to create a new package, and it's going to be repo, and inside of this create a new class called transaction repo, and we need to pass private var db app database, and here we are going to do the exact same which we have done in the DAO class. So suspend function, here insert, and we are going to insert transaction model class, and it's going to be db dot get transaction DAO dot insert transaction, and we have to pass this transaction class inside this constructor. Insert transaction. So now we have to do the same. Just copy this, and it's update, and I'm going to change it to update transaction, and it is in delete, and just type delete transaction. So now we have to type get all transaction, get all transaction, and for that function get all transactions, and be db dot get transaction turbo dot get all transactions, and we have to get only the single transaction type, get single transaction type, which is going to be expense or income. So function get all single transaction, and it's going to be db dot get transaction dot get transaction. So here we need to pass the string, which is transaction type, so that just type transaction type, which is going to be string. Inside of this, just pass that parameter. So now we have successfully finished the transaction repo. Are done with the RoomDB setup, and now we need to set up the data store for storing the UI mode preference for our expense tracker application. So for that, we need to set up a data store, and I'm going to close this and just create a new package called Datastore. And inside of this package, I'm going to create a new class called data UI mode data store, and the top, what I'm going to do is create an abstract class called friends data store, and I'm going to pass the context, also the file name called string, and you have to type internal val data store, and here it's going to be preferences is equal to context dot create data store, and name is going to be file name. So we just need to delete this. Yes. And now inside of this, we need to add pass the context here, and also we have to extend this from data store. Inside of this, we are going to pass the context as well as the friends file UI mode. So we have to create constant. So we have to create a companion object here in the bottom, and private constant val file UI mode, which is going to be UI mode preference. And also we need to add another one, private val, which is not constant, UI mode key, and it's going to be preferences key and boolean, and name will be UI mode. Now we need to create an interface to implement the save and read. For that, I'm going to type interface. So this interface must be out of this interface UI mode implement inside of that, well, instead of this val UI mode is equal to low flow, which returns boolean, and we have another one which is suspend function and save to data store, and which is this night mode. So it's a boolean. So now we need to extend this here, comma UI mode implement, and now you will be able to see the error here. You have to click on this and you have to click implement members. I'm going to select both and click OK. Now you will get the to override functions here. So now we need to change the UI mode. So it's going to be datastore.data.map, and inside of this, well, UI mode is equal to preferences and UI mode key, or else it is going to be false, and we have to return the UI mode. And here we need to write or save the data to the data store. For that we need to do datastore.edit, and it's going to be preferences and preferences, and then we have to add the UI mode key is night mode. So we are mapping those value to the key. So the key is here. By default you can able to see the key, which is UI mode, and in the UI mode key we are just changing the values to night mode. I'm going to move this companion to the bottom, and just to save the data store, use to get the data store. Now we have successfully set up the data store for our expense track application. Now we need to create a new package, and it's going to be utils, and inside of this util package we need to create a new sealed class called ViewState. So I'm going to explain what is ViewState here. So first create the class, and it's going to be ViewState. So I have created the ViewState class here, and now just change this to sealed class. Okay, so what is ViewState? ViewState should represent the current state of the application at any given point of the time. So this class will hold all the variable content on which our view is dependent on it. So basically imagine that our application will have like 4 types of state. One is the loading state, whenever you are fetching something from internet or fetching from the local DB, and after that we will have an success state or error state, and even sometimes we will have an empty state if no data presence. So these are all the states. So first of all we need to create a state. For that I'm going to create a loading state object loading. It's going to be ViewState. The same for empty states. On empty ViewState. I have imported the wrong one, just a bit. Now we need to show the success state data class success and val transaction, and we are going to return a list if success, and we need to pass transaction model class and ViewState. The same applies for the error state, and here error, I think we can call it as an exception, and we will throw, and this is going to be ViewState. So these are all the states which our view is dependent on. So now we have successfully set up the ViewState for our application. Now we need to create a final class which is called a ViewModel, and for that I'm going to create a new package, and this package is going to be ViewModel, and inside of this I'm going to create a new class called transaction ViewModel. So the ViewModel role is to provide the data to the UI as well as survive the UI configuration on device rotation. So ViewModel also act as a bridge in communication center, which is exactly like a bridge between the repository as well as the UI. So I'm going to explain what is ViewModel. So imagine this is a repository and this one as an UI. So whenever user performs an operation, now the ViewModel will be triggered. Hey, this user have been requesting for the data. Now the ViewModel will go to the repository and ask for the data. Now the repository will provide some data to the ViewModel, and now ViewModel will go to the UI and it will update the UI. So this is the process which is happening in a fraction of a second. I think we don't need to put all our business logic in our UI layer. So that's the main reason of ViewModel. And yeah, so now we need to extend this ViewModel. So inside of this constructor we need to pass an application and also repository, transaction repo, and I think we need to update this with Android ViewModel, and inside of this we have to pass this constructor called application. So I'm going to delete this, and now the first thing which we have to do right now is to init the first thing we have to do right now is to init the Datastore for UI mode preference. For that I'm going to type so private val UI mode Datastore, and it's going to be UI mode Datastore, and we need to pass this context called application. So after that we need to get the UI mode, get UI mode. So for that we need to get UI mode is equal to UI mode Datastore dot UI mode. That's all. So we need to also write to the UI mode, right? We have to update. So for that I'm going to type save UI mode. So for that we need to type function. It's going to be a function save to Datastore, and it's going to have a boolean, so we are just using boolean to switch between day and night mode. Is night boolean, which is going to be a true or false. And inside of this, we are going to type ViewModel scope dot launch, and this is going to be performed on a background thread. For that, I'm going to type IO. So Alt enter and import it. So inside of this, we're going to type UI Datastore dot save to Datastore and is night mode. We have successfully done with getting the UI mode as well as writing the UI mode. Now it's time to write all the queries for that. Now it's time to write the transactions queries here, which is a function. So for that, function get transactions, which is going to be transaction report dot get as live data. And now we need to write the state flow here. So for that, private val UI state, which is going to be mutable state flow, and inside of this we are going to pass our view state and ViewState dot by initial we are going to be called it as loading. And now, and also we need to get the UI state. For that, UI state is equal to UI state dot as StateFlow. So now this will collect UI collect from this state flow to get the state updates. So we are going to get all the updates from this one called UI states. And now we need to write the queries. The first query will be like transaction. So insert transaction. So in the function insert transaction, and we are going to pass the transaction model here, and ViewModel scope dot launch, and inside of that transaction report dot insert and transaction. We are going to do the same for update, so just change it to update transaction, and here we have to type update. And now we need to also get the we also need to delete the transaction. For that, delete transaction, and it's going to be delete. So now we need to get all the transaction. For that, what I'm going to do is init. So whenever we are loading our application, it will automatically get the transaction by default. So for that, ViewModel scope dot launch, and inside of that transaction repo dot get all transaction, and we have to use collect here, and I'm going to type results if the results are not results, it's result dot is null or empty, then we have to update this UI state to ViewState dot empty. So otherwise, else UI state dot value is equal to ViewState dot success, and inside of this we are going to pass this result. So we are just getting all the transaction by default, and we are checking whether the result is null or empty. If it's null or empty, then we are just updating this UI state with empty state, and if it's not empty, and we are just updating this with an result, which is like the results of all transaction inside the success. So if I just click on this, so you will be able to see we are just collecting the list of transaction here in success state. So if we have done with the queries, and what I'm thinking is I have updated the UI a little bit so for better user experience, and it will save a tons of our time. So let's switch back to design. Here you will able to see we have a small spinner drop down here. So whenever you click on it, we will show the 3 filters here. One is overall, second one is all income, and third one is all expense. When you select all income, now this screen will be something like this, and the total balance will change to total income here, and below that we will have all the recent incomes transaction we have made. So when you select all expense, it will do vice versa. And for this we need to change the code a little bit. So I'm just switching back to Android Studio, and here what I'm going to do is we have to create a new StateFlow val transaction filter. So it's going to be mutable StateFlow. Inside of this, string is a type, and the default value will be overall, and we need to get the state of transaction filter. So filter state is equal to transaction filter as StateFlow. So whenever you make a change in a drop down, the value will be updated in the StateFlow. We are observing that value and emitting the latest value with the StateFlow. So now I'm going to change this to get all single transaction, and inside of this let's type filter state dot value. So the parameter will change and automatically passed here. And now we need to change the transaction repo class. I'm going to open transaction repo, and here we have to write one small condition that's going to be if transaction type is equal to overall, then inside of this we need to write get all transaction. So we are going to select all transaction for overall, else we are going to get db dot get transaction dot get single transaction, and we are going to pass this transaction type. I'm going to auto align this, yes. So now if you just pass the overall, we will get all the transaction, and if you just pass any particular type called income or expense, then we are going to get the transaction by type. And I think we have successfully set up the ViewModel for our expense tracker application, and I know it's a pretty long setup tutorial, but so I think I have covered everything for the database setup here. So in this tutorial we have seen how to set up a room DB and how to set up the data store and how to create the ViewModel class and what is the use of ViewState with the StateFlow. So I think it's a pretty long tutorial, but it's going to be really worth it. So from the next tutorial, we're going to see how to play with the UI elements and how to play with some cool transitions, as well as we are going to connect this backend with the front end. So it's going to be really exciting. In case if you have any comments or any suggestion, feel free to leave it in the comment section. Until and unless, it's bye from Insane Developer.